Welcome and thank you for joining us at today's event that we are very pleased to be co-hosting together with the Access to Medicine Foundation. My name is Lina Blume. I'm a sustainability analyst here at Handelsbanken, and I'm happy to be joined by Mattias Häggblom, Head of Healthcare Research. Today we are going to discuss the findings of the 2024 Access to Medicine Index that evaluate 20 of the world's leading pharmaceutical companies according to their efforts to address access to medicine for people living in low and middle income countries, identifying best practice, tracking progress, and highlighting where critical action is needed.
Thanks so much, Lina. My name is Mattias Häggblom. I'm Sector Head of Healthcare Research here at Handelsbanken, as you heard. And thanks so much also from my side to join us and the foundation to discuss this very important topic. We're super excited to host the foundation again for a second time, most recently back in 2021. And 30 minutes ago, the 9th version of the Access to Medicine Index was published, and I've already seen some companies press release and reference the index, so it's making its way through the news already. Before I introduce today's speakers, I'm going to go through some practicalities, just in brief. We're going to hear from the foundation for roughly 30 minutes around the findings in this year's index. And then we're going to run a Q&A for roughly 30 minutes, in total an hour. And during the Q&A, you in the audience can also engage in the discussion by sending me or Lina an email or text message with your question, and me and Lina will tie those questions into the discussion with the foundation. So enough of intros and practicalities. Over to today's speakers. I'm very happy to have 4 persons from the foundation. So Pauline Lenhoff, Head of Industry Engagement, Camille Romero, Research Program Manager, Access to Medicine Index, Avanti Gupta, Investor Engagement Manager, as well as Susanna Farnés, Investor Engagement Manager. Thanks so much all for being here with us. I'm going to hand over to you and go through some of the findings from this year's index. Welcome.
Thanks, Mattias. Thanks, Lina. We really appreciate the warm welcome. We're obviously delighted to be here. It's incredibly exciting. As you just said, we launched our 9th ever index 30 minutes ago. So today is set to be a fantastic jam-packed agenda. Moving to our slides. Bear with me as I click. Lina, Joseph, and Mattias, obviously, thank you for providing us the opportunity to connect. My name is Susanna Farnés, for those on the call new to the work of the foundation, and I'm joined here by my colleagues. We've mentioned Avanti, Camille, and Pauline are in the room. We also have other colleagues sitting around us, including our investor engagement team, pictured here on the screen today. The Access to Medicine Foundation is a Netherlands-based not-for-profit established in 2003. And today, really, we're gathered here today to just take you through our flagship publication, the Access to Medicine Index, but also to showcase how our research and insights are used by one of the largest healthcare investor signatory collaboratives globally. At the foundation, our mission is quite simple. It is to mobilize healthcare companies, mostly pharmaceutical companies, to close the access gap in low and middle income countries. Considering the advances we've made in other sectors, it's really quite astonishing to think that many people still can't access the medicine they need when they need them. And you can actually access the internet almost everywhere in the world, which seems a little wild. We're an independent organization. We're free from any funding from the pharmaceutical sector, and we publish our research and insights in an objective manner. They're utilized by a wide audience as well. Governments, policymakers, academics, investors, and companies themselves use our work. We are also one of the few organizations in the world who focus on access in low and middle income countries. Some 80% of the world's people live here. Aside from a significant social call to action for health equity, from an investment perspective, it's really easy to understand how we see this as a fertile ground for innovation and growth in developing and emerging markets. We've been working with a core group of investors for several years now, translating our research into practical and actionable steps. With just over 147 signatories, Handelsbanken being one of them, our collaborative represents a collective USD AUM of over 22 trillion. That's quite some backing when you think that our signatories sit across the table with senior company leadership. At its heart, our work with investors is really simple. We have an investor statement which is open all year round for new members to join. Once signed on, signatories formally become part of our SDG3 collaborative. Here, signatories gain access to several benefits detailed on the slide, and it's important to also just point out to colleagues on the call, participation in all of our research and insights are free. So, why are we here today? It's really to understand the Access to Medicine Index and how you might use the 2024 Index Insights to steward the companies that you engage towards a more sustainable business profile. Before diving into the report itself, the next few slides are going to take you through what the index actually measures. This slide really just provides a high-level look inside the report. It's a bit like the Amazon book review before you add it to your cart. So when you're downloading your copy online, please do not be put off by the sheer volume of the index. The report has been designed to be used in segments by different stakeholder groups, including specialist sections which are used extensively by investors. Over the years, we've sort of kept the format and the content relatively stable, except for where we've had to make necessary adjustments to our methodology that reflect a changing global healthcare landscape. For those on the call today, I'd really just love to draw your attention to our industry trends, our key findings, best practices, and company report cards. Combined, these would give you, as investors, all of the information that you need as part of your company assessments or engagement dialogues. Our report cards actually are so detailed that they even highlight specific opportunities that each company can take to improve their portfolio. Now that I've sort of given you a high-level understanding of how to navigate the report, it's also really important to take a moment to just explain what is in the report or the scope of our analysis. In brief, we look at 20 companies. So in 2024, this index, 19 companies submitted data to the foundation. In terms of our data collection, we report on a combination of publicly available data as well as data provided by these submitting companies. 2024 sees MSD as the only company who did not submit additional data directly to the index. However, they do engage regularly with the foundation. In addition to these 20 companies, we look at 113 low and middle income countries, where countries are selected according to the most recent UNDP Human Development Report and World Bank classification. Covering 81 diseases, conditions, and pathogens, including non-communicable and communicable diseases, we assess 8 different product types. There is also a detailed methodology guide that exists freely online, which can be accessed obviously for those with an eye for a detail. In 2024, the Foundation is also really proud to introduce a new priority topic. This is on measuring and reporting patient reach. This follows on from a standalone publication this September covering the theme in detail. The index assesses each company across 3 technical areas. This allows like-for-like comparison across the companies in scope. Specifically, if you look on the left-hand side of the slide, we look at governance of access, research and development, and product delivery. Across these areas, we then have 32 different indicators across a subset of priority topics. Each have slightly different weightings. If you move left to right on the image, you'll see that each topic has a different number of indicators, as indicated by those colored dots. Generally, governance of access tends to be the most material topic for investors, probably not surprising if you consider the areas you're likely to discuss during your engagement dialogues. Again, this year, under this technical area, we have a new priority topic, measuring and reporting patient reach. As we move to the research and development theme, product development tends to be the most material for investors, especially those innovative products when it comes to new or emerging markets and planning appropriately for access in these. Finally, when we move to the product delivery technical area, we zone into 5 material themes: equitable access strategies, intellectual property, inclusive business models, licensing, and registration. It would be really great as part of the Q&A today to see how much of this actually resonates with you. You can engage across all of the themes, obviously, but we've simply shared where a lot of the SDG3 collaborative or our signatory investors spend most of their time. The industry trends section of the report goes into more on how these companies perform in each area. Obviously, as well, if you're interested, our detailed methodology goes into the actual sort of specifics of how these analytical framework gets applied across all 20 companies. We have just sort of touched lightly on the analytical framework. It's a whistle-stop tour. We only have 30 minutes today. We want to keep your attention. But I did mention that you could find out more in the industry trends section of the report. This slide really tries to just give a glance at a high level into the 2024 index industry trends through 3 simple visualizations or spider charts. Looking at the slide left to right, we have governance of access in the red chart, we have product delivery in the purple chart, and research and development in the green chart. You may recall the coloured dots on the previous slide, which showed us the indicators for each technical area and priority topic. These topics get assigned scores based on the period of analysis and are then plotted on the spider diagrams. With a score plotted on a scale of 1 to 5, we can see the average score across 20 companies for each priority topic. This is what gives us a snapshot of industry performance across key areas. If we look at the red chart, governance of access, we see companies are generally performing very well. They're quite close to that 5. Progress is being made in areas like measuring and reporting patient reach, that new indicator, with a score of 2.85. There is, however, still significant room for improvement. In contrast, when we move to the implementation side of the spider diagrams, the purple and the green, product delivery and R&D, we see a lower performance. In product delivery, the purple chart, areas such as health system strengthening, product donations are performing strongly. However, licensing quality is lagging behind. For R&D, there's obviously, as you can see on the green chart, still considerable progress needed, with room for improvement across the board. These spider diagrams only offer a snapshot of where companies are excelling and where they need to improve. When your areas of improvement align with material issues for your organization, this represents an opportunity for engagement. If we try and think of these industry trends now in the context of some of the key takeaways in this 2024 index, we find that generally most companies have maintained a comprehensive access to medicine strategy. They've made promising commitments to people in LMICs. The challenge, however, is that this progress and this implementation across these initiatives remains limited. The industry as well, sadly as a whole, has shown signs of stagnation with uneven progress across these technical areas, despite these really clear opportunities for impact. So a significant portion of efforts have really been focused on upper middle income countries as well, while the needs in low income countries remain largely unmet. With this high-level view of the industry trends, you're probably now quite eager to dive into how the individual companies are performing in the 2024 index, or that all-important famous ranking. This is probably one of the most accessed images in the publication. I won't talk for a brief moment just to allow you to digest the data, but where we've just looked at the spider charts, you can see the purple, red and green color now applies per company. We cluster the companies into different performance categories. So you can see here the leaders perform strongly in every area. Then just behind them, there's this group of high-performing companies, each of them performing strongly across the board. In other words, doing really well in all 3 technical areas. We then move into the middle pack, 7 through to 14. Companies here showing some strength, but their performance isn't consistent across all areas. Finally, there's the companies ranking 15 or lower, who have got good practice in 1 or 2 indicators, but across the board we see gaps. With the increased emphasis this year on assessing the outcomes of companies' policy and practices, there has actually also been a global decrease in performance across all 20 companies. This means that no company is meeting its full potential yet, and those at the bottom obviously have quite a bit more work to do. Sadly, the COVID-19 pandemic showed us what was possible, marked a turning point for companies to maximize their efforts in accelerating access to more products in more geographies. And sadly, since the 22 index and this pandemic, we've not seen these efforts actually scale up as we would have hoped. If we look at a couple of individual companies this year, Novartis overtakes GSK for the top position. And this is the first time that a company other than GSK holds the number 1 spot. There's been quite a lot of movement actually in this index, which makes it a really exciting publication year. Both companies, GSK and Novartis, are extremely close on performance. Novartis has a robust governance structure and demonstrates how it puts policy into practice. It also has really robust access plans for both NCDs and communicable diseases, with broader country coverage compared to its peers. GSK, meanwhile, demonstrates strong performance across the board, leading, however, in product delivery, with a particularly strong performance in access strategies and licensings. It continues to have the largest priority pipeline in comparison to its peers, with R&D access plans in place for most pipeline candidates. If we look at Sanofi, who came third, Pfizer fourth, they really stand out for engaging in large-scale inclusive business models. You've probably heard of the Sanofi Global Health Unit, the Pfizer Accord for a Healthier World. Sanofi is also another exciting example of a mover. It moves up from position 8 in 2022 and is now new in the top 3. It leads in governance of access and performs strongly in R&D, with a diverse pipeline of projects for NCDs and priority diseases. So far, I've taken you through what we analyse in the report, how this generates a view of industry trends, and a little bit of a high-level view on some of the company performances. The next section of this presentation, and the last sort of 15 minutes or so, we're going to take you through what the Foundation has found overall. So that's from all of the data that we've analysed, and we've tried to sort of summarise this succinctly across 3 key findings. Our first key finding is centred around inclusive business models. Over the past 5 years, the 2024 index has tracked significant efforts by companies to expand access to their products across more countries and more populations. We find that more companies are starting to include LDCs, signalling a really positive trend towards broader inclusivity. 5 companies in total have developed and launched inclusive business models that aim to improve access for neglected populations, particularly your low-income and least developed countries. That's that LDC's acronym. Across these 5 companies, we have products covering 102 of the 113 LMICs covered in the index, including all 48 low-income countries. Some companies are including broad product portfolios in their model, while other models are focusing on specific products only. The 5 companies featured in the index have also sort of structured their IBM models somewhat differently. Some are allocating funding from their CSR budgets, while others have positioned their models as non-profit initiatives. For us, it will be really interesting to see how companies that focus on specific products only, i.e. not the full product portfolio, how these companies will expand their portfolios in the future. Currently, the majority of products, or 73% of products, are included in these models, and they're targeting non-communicable diseases. So that's your diseases such as oncology, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. NCDs disproportionately affect people in low and middle-income countries, where more than 3/4 of global deaths occur. Low-income countries have historically been overlooked in terms of NCD product access, and so this coverage that's included in companies' IBMs is a really, really positive step forward. We do, however, have a couple of challenges, and we need a greater sort of transparency around these inclusive business models. The outcomes of these models still are very mixed, and there is this lack of transparent reporting on how many patients are actually being reached. So as more companies hopefully start to adopt IBMs, it's really crucial that they provide clear, transparent updates on their progress, especially in terms of patient reach. You can play a really strong role in this in encouraging greater transparency across the sector. It might also be interesting here just to call out Sanofi. They currently are the only company that clearly reports on the number of patients reached through its inclusive business models. In terms of sort of mapping the next 2-year engagement cycle for our signatories, we're really interested in working alongside investors to learn more about how companies are positioning IBMs into their overall business strategy. They're sort of quite distinct from your donation programs, but IBMs aren't fully aligned with your traditional for-profit model either. So understanding how these models evolve could really provide valuable insights into creating new channels for reaching underserved markets in the future. The second key finding is on clinical trials. Only 43% of clinical trials analysed in the index are conducted in low and middle income countries, despite these regions being home to nearly 80% of the global population. If we look at the map on this slide, we can see clinical trials are really heavily concentrated in certain regions, many countries lacking active trials altogether. This gap, however, does present a significant opportunity. When a clinical trial achieves success, investors are typically eager to support the scaling up of these innovations. The global success of any clinical innovation could be much more far-reaching, much more quickly, if only they were tested and accessible in more diverse regions. So, from an investor perspective, if we could expand clinical trial coverage to include LMICs, this would be a very strategic move. Not only does it improve the quality of a clinical trial by ensuring that they're actually representing a globally diverse population, but it also opens up new markets. With greater trial coverage in LMICs, the potential to unlock untapped opportunities for growth exist. For the next index cycle, we're really excited to engage with investors and companies alike in a discussion about better clinical trial access. It is quite well established that countries where clinical trials are conducted face fewer access challenges than those without the trial participation. So the bottom line, companies with the most diverse clinical trial portfolios and global footprints are those who are most likely to succeed in the future and address access issues. If the map also here isn't clearly sort of illustrating the potential of regions like Africa as a fertile ground for this innovation, we might need to revisit the slide design. Of the trials that are currently being conducted in LMICs, only 3.5% of them are taking place in a low-income country, and these are predominantly focused on communicable diseases. In the 2024 index, we've identified several companies who are making efforts to increase clinical trial focus in your under-resourced regions. These companies include Bayer, Eisai, Gilead, GSK, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, Novartis, and Sanofi. And they are the companies that are really leading the way in improving access to clinical trials in these underserved regions. Of course, it may not be intuitive to you, but there is sort of variation in trial capacity. So the capacity for a company to conduct a clinical trial does vary significantly across different countries and regions. We go into the details of this in the 2024 index in a very sort of pragmatic way. This disparity can actually impact the scope and the effectiveness of trials conducted in LMICs. However, to help address these, there are several things that companies could do. So, for example, companies could expand their trial sites to routinely include LMICs when necessary infrastructure is already in place, so go where it already exists. Equally, companies could collaborate with local partners to enhance research capabilities and build that infrastructure where it's lacking. By conducting trials in specific countries, it's really essential for addressing market access. We see that companies often prioritize countries where clinical trials are conducted first, which leaves large portions of the world behind without any access to new innovations. By increasing clinical trial country coverage, this access challenge can be tackled much earlier on. Moving on to the final key finding today, centered on voluntary licensing and technology transfer. The 2022 index identified 6 new non-exclusive voluntary licenses, or NEVLs, which signaled a really encouraging trend of increased engagement by companies. Sadly, the 2024 index reveals a slowdown, with only 2 new licenses issued, which sort of indicates a bit of a retreat from this promising approach. We referenced COVID earlier and a slight stagnation. This is a similar slowing down trend that we're seeing again this year. It's a real pity because there are several sort of missed opportunities for public health here. There are several organizations who have prioritized at least 10 key patented treatments, including potential licensing candidates for conditions such as cancer. For those who haven't heard the term before, just to sort of quickly get you up to speed, voluntary licensing is the way in which a pharmaceutical company manages its intellectual property. It directly affects the availability and the affordability of critical medicines and vaccines. It helps enable local production of medicines. It allows a patent holder to grant a generic manufacturer the permission to produce a patented medicine or vaccine, typically at a lower cost. The license also usually includes quality standards and specifies the countries in which the product can then be sold. When combined with technology transfers, voluntary licensing is a really powerful strategy for pharmaceutical companies to improve long-term and sustainable access. In technology transfer, a company transfers knowledge on how to produce a specific medicine or vaccine to a local manufacturing site, along with the necessary technology to produce it. The decision to transfer technology depends on sort of certain factors like finding the right partners or local political climates and the market environment. So similar to voluntary licensing in terms of the trends, we saw an increase in technology transfer during the COVID-19 pandemic. However, this index iteration, and as the map on the slide shows, the momentum has slowed. Sub-Saharan Africa is actually also largely overlooked. Obviously, there's a little bit of activity here down in South Africa. When interpreting this finding, we should really consider this alongside the previous key finding on inclusive business models. Why, you might ask? Simply, from a foundation perspective, we believe that only by combining these approaches, voluntary licensing, technology transfer, and inclusive business models, can we achieve the scale of access that's required to meet the need of underserved populations. When engaging with companies, therefore, and thinking about, the different tools that they have available to expand access, it can be really valuable for you to understand and dialogue with the companies. What products are being expanded into these markets? Is it via IBM? Is it by voluntary licensing? What other access strategies could potentially be employed to improve availability further? These are also themes that we tend to engage on in our investor briefing series for signatories, which kicks off early next year. You can also reference some of these detailed company opportunities in the company report card section of the report, which I referenced earlier. This takes us to the end of today's presentation on the index findings. We've looked at how to navigate the publication, how the analysis is conducted, and where companies are performing. We've shared some industry trends. We've provided detail on 3 key findings, and throughout we've tried to zone into the issues that we believe will be most material to you. The next section of the event today takes us into Q&A, and preempting some of the frequently asked questions, the next slide touches briefly on how you can get involved. I'll just keep this up for a few minutes as we prepare for the Q&A. As Matthias warmly welcomed us, joining us for the Q&A, we're welcoming our Head of Industry Engagement, Pauline, as well as our Head of Research, Camille, and our Investor Engagement Manager, Avanti Gupta. Also in the room are Twanell and Bram from the Investor Engagement team. If I don't get another chance today, or we get too stuck into dialogue, debate, questions, I would also like to take this opportunity to thank you all for your time and attention today, and I look forward to a dynamic discussion together just now.
Thank you so much, Susie. I think we lost you. Oh, yeah, you're back on the video, so thanks for that. Thanks so much for the presentation. Truly exciting. And as a reminder, during the Q&A, you in the audience can also engage in discussion by sending me or Lina your questions through email or text message, and we'll make sure to tie them into the discussion. So with that, Lina, I'll let you kick off the Q&A session.
Super. Thank you, Matthias, and thank you, Susie, for a great presentation. Despite some progress, the index finds an overall stagnation in the efforts to improve access to medicine and highlights that companies could do more to scale up their initiatives. I assume this could differ between different companies, but what would you say are the primary barriers causing this stagnation?
Yeah, I think I can take this one. I think it's not a single factor that we see causing that stagnation here for this year index. I think as Susie slightly alluded when she was presenting also the framework that we use this year, we really put a strong emphasis on the outcome of the initiative that company are putting in place. So in terms of looking at are you reaching the patients? So we had like 3 new indicators, so that kind of play in the performance of the company here. And on top of it, Susie also mentioned COVID. We saw a few of the initiatives that stopped and the potential that was shown by company during COVID that kind of dropped this time around. We see that in the licensing, in the tech transfer, area, for example. So a few examples of the stagnation that we see here.
And sticking to the topic, I went back to the 2022 report, noting that the average score was down almost a quarter of a point, and no more than 5 companies improved their score since the index in 2022, while 15 declined. So any additional thoughts on why we see this development? I'm thinking out loud that we're still in the process of returning to normal post the pandemic, which you sort of alluded to. But in addition, also in 2022, we saw the Biden administration implement the Inflation Reduction Act that have created some imbalances in terms of how small molecule vis-a-vis more complex medicines may be incentivized over time. And some people think that has influenced companies' portfolio prioritization. So any more thoughts in terms of the dynamic here and any directional towards already now thinking about the next report in a few years?
I think on this one, it's a mix of like different dynamics, right? But as you were saying, on of course, the global context is changing. Not to get into the sort of nitty-gritty details of our methodology. Our methodology also changes throughout the different index cycles, and the investments are also changing. Are driving some of the decisions being taken by big pharmaceutical companies. So it's kind of a mix of the context changing, the COVID changing the sort of overall dynamic of the markets, but also also sometimes strategic decisions within the companies that might change. We see typically what is also that there is definitely a drop in the score, but there are some actually interesting movements of like companies moving more towards inclusive business models. We see some encouraging sort of movement there, and kind of curious of post-announcement moments. What is this gonna lead to, even in a few months' time or a couple of years' time?
Yeah, just to add to that, there I think are a set of dynamic factors at play, and there's also pressures in the US which also affect sort of access globally, and investments from US governments. They have knock-on effects on access, so that's all sort of playing out.
Regarding reporting, the index mentions that non-consistent reporting is a limitation when it comes to assessment of companies. For example, as you mentioned, when it comes to reported patient reach. How has the company's reporting on data related to access to medicine developed over time, and what would you say are the main challenges when it comes to reporting?
This one? On this, I think we see definitely a movement towards more transparency, and there's also sort of a trust being built in companies understand the value in taking part, in those sort of reporting exercises and evaluation exercises. There's also there's a sort of competition effect, right? So once a company is more transparent, and there's also a lot of advantages to get from that in terms of company image, then there's a kind of a dynamic movement of other companies following. So we've seen that also for the work that we mentioned earlier on patient reach, with quite a lot of companies being quite transparent, not only on their patient reach goals, but also on the way they calculate that, for instance. And then some other companies being quite surprised by how much was disclosed, and creating this eagerness to be like, oh, well, let me discuss this internally. Let me see if we can share more than next time around. So I think there's this dynamic throughout the different indexes, even though there are still a ton of barriers. I think you were talking about limitations. We're talking about extremely sensitive information to be shared, but we do have processes for that anyway to deal with sensitive information. So this is definitely a barrier, but we're trying to work around that.
Thank you. And we actually have a question from the audience that's going in a bit into detail. It goes, AstraZeneca dropped the ranking this time. What are key reasons for that? Other companies improving more, or is AstraZeneca performing worse year on year?
Yeah, I can try to address this. I think it can be a mix of both here, and as we mentioned also earlier, this year we see definitely a global trend of companies' performance dropping. As Susie has shown with the ranking slide, she has shown earlier, AstraZeneca remain in what we call the top performing company, right? So in the top 6, so it's still in that group where we see kind of consistent performance across the board. In that case, like across all technical areas that we're looking at. For AstraZeneca, I also can definitely feel the effect also of COVID momentum being a bit gone. I mean, they were also a key player with their vaccine a couple of years ago and even in the previous index.
So the report notes that Boehringer Ingelheim, Bristol Myers Squibb, Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk does not have a single R&D project in scope that address priority R&D gaps, as it's defined in the report. As a consequence, it's perhaps not surprising that those companies score poorly on R&D. But if a company lacks historical precedence within a field, often infectious disease, that remains a particular challenge in low and middle income countries, they're unlikely to be able to help much because they lack the insight and perhaps experience as well as talent. So as a consequence, they may always score poorly on the R&D side. What's the thoughts from the foundation on that matter?
Yeah, no, you're correct. I mean, we have an indicator that particularly look at priority R&D and the engagement of companies in that area. But again, this is the only indicator that we have in our framework where a company would be penalized if they don't engage in R&D for those priority targets. But on the other side, we still see like companies that are not heavily engaged in those priority research and development that still perform quite well. We also apply, and then this is going really in the technicality of it, but if a company don't have the suitable portfolio pipeline for some other indicators, we apply a neutral scoring, so they're not penalized further. We still think that's the responsibility of those innovative companies to address the priority gaps out there. We see a lot of the companies that are shifting their pipeline, and some having been more engaged in priority disease in the past and not kind of moving away. So we still think it's our responsibility to hold them accountable to stay engaged in that area.
The report identifies a lack of clinical trials in low-income countries. What incentives or strategies could encourage companies to expand clinical trials to underserved regions, and how can companies be incentivized to invest in local R&D?
Yeah, again, indeed, we see kind of a lack of those clinical trials happening in those regions. And we also acknowledge that you need partnership. You need to have like also the structure and the grant for those clinical trials to happen. So there's also the role of the clinical research organization, the CRO, that are major player on the field. But for the clinical trial that we see happening indeed in LIC, they are all, I think, led in partnership. So again, like looking for the right people on the ground, like country where already you have a bit of capacity, also is a nice starting point, I would say, for companies here.
Yeah, exactly. It sort of sets up the ecosystem to sort of pave the way for later, and that's really powerful and important to sort of think about.
That's very clear and helpful. As a reminder for those who are on the call together with us, you can send email questions or text message to me or Lina, and we will make sure to tie those into the discussion with the foundation. So one of the findings in the report is the observation that the pipeline for medicines targeting priority R&D, including malaria as well as tuberculosis, shrunk by roughly 30% since the last report was generated. So any feedback from the companies that was researched when preparing the report, why we see this shift in priorities?
There is a shift that we see also just towards non-communicable diseases, because that's something that gets quite a lot of attention. Of course, from companies, it represents also quite extensive markets. So we do identify that in our findings as well, right, related to R&D. And it's always essential to us to also keep pushing for sort of not forgotten areas, but at least areas that are a bit left behind, and disease areas that are left behind. And our key focus is always to sort of bring the attention back to the burden of disease and what is essential to tackle in low and middle income countries, because the focus and the dynamic can quickly shift towards, where are the markets, etc., which is, of course, an essential dynamic. But there's, you need to always put that in light with where is the problem right now? Where are the upcoming problems in LMICs? What can we do about this? And where can companies step in? Alongside other organizations and governments, just like kind of Camille was mentioning in the previous question, that there is an essential responsibility from the companies to when there's a gap to kind of get in and not all focus on the same disease areas.
Thank you for that. And based on the topic of what we were discussing before with the added parameters on measuring and reporting patient reach, could you provide some detail on why this new parameter was added this year?
Yes, happy to do so. And again, it's the index has been around for some time now, and it started really like first at looking at policies and are you starting to think about access at the company level? But the more we move and the more company also move in access, like policies is not enough. And then you implement the initiative, right? Implementing the initiative is good, but what's the outcome? What's the result out there? If you don't reach the patients, there's no added value per se. So again, we really felt that it was an important topic now to address and to kind of carefully look at. Are the initiative and policies from the company have impact? And are you reaching the patient that needs your products? So again, we indeed implementing those 3 new parameters that we have. So first, more higher level. Do you have a systemic process in place where you look and calculate the number of patients you're reaching, which is more on the governance side. And then when we look at the product level, we also ask for data at this point. So yeah, mixed result on that side. I think you can read more in the report of what we see at the product level. But again, important to reach the patient and to show that you reach the patient.
Yeah, just adding to that as well. I think what we talk about is a lot, like what gets measured gets managed, and the current way of doing it is quite basic. So we're just trying to raise the bar on making it slightly more sophisticated, and then that obviously drives that further down the line.
Brilliant. So we have an incoming investor question. It's a sort of a two-part question, so I'll take them at one go. So assuming the foundation changes the methodology and process for how the index is calculated, it may create difficulties for the companies to include the score in long-term incentive programs. So what is the foundation's view on that, and how many companies, perhaps, if I may add, are already using some kind of part of the index included in such long-term incentive programs, obviously to stimulate and drive change. And then secondly, many of the companies part of the Access to Medicine Index talk about that one of the biggest challenges in low and middle income countries is infrastructure, including testing, transport, as well as knowledge. Who shall create this infrastructure? Is it the companies, or can Access to Medicine Foundation help to an extent?
I think I can start maybe with the second part, with the challenge on the ground. And indeed, we acknowledge that not all the capacity is there in some geographies, and we look at company also engaging in those what we call capacity building initiative. We, however, don't see that as their main, shouldn't be their main responsibility. If they do it because they have the expertise or the financial mean, we're looking at them doing it in partnership. So either with partner on the ground or other organizations that already have experience there in terms of capacity building. But again, and as we see also with the inclusive business model that I mentioned in the first key finding, we see the primary responsibility of the company to deliver the product. However, if it's not there, you need to think about other aspects and find the partner that can help you on the ground to go and deliver your product. So yeah, that's the answer to the second part of the questions. I don't know if someone wants to take the first part.
On the methodology,
Yeah.
and do you want to feel free to jump in, Avanti, as well? On the methodology part, so and just to clarify, obviously we are. It would be kind of weird when you think of it if we would have the same methodology for like 10 years or something. So there is definitely a need to review our methodology every time. But this doesn't mean, though, that we're completely rethinking or starting from a blank page every time. There's a lot of continuity. So that's why the index remains quite comparable over years, and both investors and companies would sort of find what they're looking for because they would be quite used to the exercise. And in terms of long-term incentives, we see that typically happening, especially when companies are quite, scoring well or quite serious about their thinking and their strategy about access. Then definitely you would see that taken into account into the long-term incentives.
Okay. So another incoming question from an investor. Many of the medicines that score well in an index like this are vaccines, as they are cost effective and they prevent disease. So the question goes, we have a new administration on the verge of taking over power in the US, and with a health secretary nominee that is associated with anti-vax statements and IDs. So does the foundation have any general thoughts what consequences of the ongoing anti-vax wave, to the extent there is one, may lead to consequences for perhaps the next index or the next couple of years?
I wonder actually on this if this is, well, actually on the way vaccines are sort of like weighted in the index. I'm not sure we would fully agree with that. I don't know.
And the way we look at the vaccine and the access to vaccine in the index, indeed we have a large scope of product that we look at in the index, going from vaccine to more like special medicine and oncology. but when we look at those, like they're mostly like procured like through supranational procurement. So it's more either through like organization like Gavi, for example, for procurement in an MIC. So there's specific mechanism in place that are here to ensure like vaccine are distributed in NMICs. But yeah, you're right. Like with also the change in the political environment and kind of that anti-vax movement, and it's not only in the US, right? It happened a bit in several countries right now. It can be that misinformation and the vaccine hesitancy will affect the industry significantly and take us back on access for those vaccines globally. Again, the US usually kind of influence the rest of the world, so on that front, that also can put us some step back rather than some step forward in terms of vaccine.
And a change in administration means not only like some types of misinformation or information being shared, but a significant change in administration means also risks in terms of international development aid and just the investments in general from such a big country. So that puts also like specific programs, typically programs focusing on women's health, on children, on HIV, like targeted programs which are in desperate need for public funding. That puts a massive risk as well, and that can also help in a sort of a negative way actually put the attention of companies elsewhere, which is a massive risk for global health topics and priorities.
Super, thank you. And of course, we have a lot of investors listening in today, and an important topic is then if an investor would like to engage with a company with the aim to improve their access to medicine strategy, what would you say are the key factors or issues to focus on? And you touched upon this during the presentation, but how can the Access to Medicine Index be used as a tool to facilitate this engagement?
There is like in the way, and feel free to also jump in, Avanti, I don't want to step on your talk. The way investors can use the index is, sorry, not only we have the key findings, the best practices, etc., but a core part of the index is obviously company-specific findings and also company-specific opportunities that we identify for change. And that's typically something that investors can, refer back to in terms of like, okay, what could be the direction for this company? It can also help drive some of the decision making. So I think that's one of the elements. But I think Susie can jump in as well.
Yeah, really, really happy to. I think it's a great question because it's a really nice sort of segue into next steps. What now? So what investors use our sort of index, our findings in lots of different ways. Obviously, it's sort of quite a quantitative report. We do then go on through sort of our coverage in the media, special thematic reports to have quite sort of qualitative data. This tends to get combined with individual company models where they're running their own sort of algorithms or assessments to give maybe a little bit more granularity. Sometimes it's used as a complete standalone. With other sort of ratings and ranking providers influencing the main engagement dialogue. But there's lots of ways to get involved as kind of the take home. So you can sort of take our company report cards verbatim, you can engage in our investor briefing series where we go into the individual report cards. We kind of identify specific opportunities for the company to take. We then nominate lead investors who go on behalf of the signatory SDG3 collaborative, and they host these meetings with companies. In time, they should become open meetings to our entire signatory base, but at the moment they are still a sort of closed forum for the lead investor. So we work on sort of targeted and very individualized strategies per company and per lead investor. And as I say, the report has been structured in a way that you can either use it as a very sort of integrated part of your assessment, or it can be used as sort of standalone with support coming from the investor engagement team on your specifics. Everybody has sort of different timelines in terms of their engagement strategies. They have different objectives. Not everyone in the investment landscape necessarily has the same primary objective. So we do try and work in a kind of as general as we can way, but then with the ability to sort of slot into your work and help you signpost really how to use the findings or how we can help you adapt them for those dialogues. So if you do have a question or there's a company you have in mind that you want to engage on the findings with, I think perhaps get in touch with the team and we can help better understand your sort of strategy, your requirements, and advise you further.
Super, thank you for that.
Good. So we're approaching the hour. So final reminder, if you do have a question for the foundation and the index for this year, just published here an hour ago or a bit more than that, this is the time to send it in because we're approaching the hour. From a total return point of view, 2 of the 3 companies that scored worst in the index, Eli Lilly and AbbVie, are among the top 3 best pharma stocks from a shareholder return point of view since the index was published in January 21, so a time period of 3+ years. Some investors have increasing pressure from their stakeholders to generate solid returns, not least in the ongoing flow of capital to passive index close investments, which in theory may lead to less engaged ESG discussions like access to medicine. So any thoughts on why there appear to be no correlation between the score in the index and total returns, and whether that can create challenges when you come out and present the index findings?
From my perspective of like engaging with the company engagement side of things, I'm sure there are several elements of answers here. One is in order for us to evaluate correctly and kind of broadly the companies, we need also a certain level of transparency. We were talking in an earlier question about how tricky some information is to be shared, or how easy it is sometimes, and sometimes that can be quite linked in terms of we don't know what's not shared, and we don't know what's not in the public domain, so we can't evaluate it the same way we can for companies being more open about their current strategies, their next decisions, upcoming decisions, etc. So I think this is where this kind of factor of transparency, and this is completely not correlated to how big a company is or something. You need to have sort of a culture also within the company to make that a sort of process by default, and that plays a big role on access for sure.
Thank you. And then perhaps we have time for one last question. And a bit on the same topic that we just discussed, what incentives exist or could be strengthened for companies to prioritize access to medicine as part of their core strategy? And also could regulation have some kind of part in this as well?
Regulation will always play a massive role. It can be an enabler, it can be a barrier. Regulation is obviously, we're not talking about the same regulatory environment when you talk about LMICs and countries like the US or countries in Europe. One barrier that we keep discussing with companies and even other global health stakeholders is issues around registration and the burden that represents, and how much of a slow process that is, and a complicated process that is, even though sometimes there's intention to expand access. So definitely the regulation has a massive role to play, but we kind of need to balance that. We need to avoid the dialogue of one group hiding behind the other, of the private sector hiding behind the dynamics from the regulatory side, and the regulatory side complaining about. You just need to have a dynamic of just working together and hearing hearing both sides, working together on like, supranational processes to just make it more possible to expand access to not only one country here and there, but just regions of the world that are completely forgotten at the moment. So it's might be a kind of a cliche, message, but like really those different groups need to work together and to have open lines of communication.
And just to add to that, at the end, those group of 20 companies, they're like the innovators, they have the essential medicine in their portfolio. And with that portfolio come the responsibility of giving access to those innovation, right? It's not right if only like high income country have access to those innovation that you're producing. So really, you have it in your portfolio. So again, this is a essential medicine. This is a health product. So that come with the responsibility also.
And I also just want to add that it's precisely to sort of broaden the potential incentives and soften the potential regulatory impacts that we have 32 indicators, and we sort of try and look at it from different angles because there's different forces playing on generics, different on antibiotics, diabetes, and so on. So we have to look at it from different points of view.
So with that, we are approaching the hour. I wanted to thank Access to Medicine Foundation for spending the time with us, Pauline, Camille, Susie, and Avanti. Thanks for the time and the insight, and we look forward to dwell into the details of the report that is now available on the Foundation's webpage, I imagine. Perhaps leave us with some concluding remarks, if there is anything we should in particular bring with us from this conversation.
Yeah, I think I can start here. And again, this is not all gloom and doom. I mean, we saw some progress also within the last 2 years, and we saw like some good initiative happening. However, that remain kind of uneven across the board. And the report really like highlights some concrete and next steps for company to take like that step further to improve access here, really encouraging everyone to look at it.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And with that, we have to conclude this session. Thanks again to Access to Medicine Foundation for co-hosting this event with us. And thank you all for listening in.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.